Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of Transcendent Naturalism. I am joined again by my good friend and constant partner in these CogSci shows, Gregg Henriques. Gregg, it's great to have you here again. This has been a wonderful journey. We sort of tag teamed. I laid out a structural argument in the first episode, and then you filled it in, and you basically answered the question, but what are the levels, and how are the levels related to each other? And I thought the two fit. We seem to both agree that the two fit hand in glove.
There was a hand in glove phenomenon there, a conforming hand in glove.
Yeah,
multiple meta arguments. Absolutely.
So what we wanted to do was pick up on some threads that were left last time. This will probably be the last one with just Gregg and I, and then we will start moving to the videos that have other people in, other interlocutors, so we can really explicate, challenge, and grow this proposal to make it as viable as possible. But there was 3 threads, and we're going to examine them in this order. The first thread was extended naturalism, which was talked about at length in the first video. And I want to sort of push deep on it because this notion of extended naturalism, if it does overlap well with the Neoplatonic framework, for the Neoplatonists, that extended naturalism gave a profound sense of the sacred. And I want to talk to Gregg about what you might call the Neoplatonic one, which of course got taken up into Christian Neoplatonism, gets taken up into Sufism, it gets taken up into Kabbalah. So my claim that it's capable of generating a rich spiritual framework for people, I think, is pretty non-controversial. And I want to see how that interacts with Gregg's synthism. And get into discussion there. Then we're going to move into a more proper discussion of what does sacredness mean within extended naturalism. And why this is important is we have, for historical reasons, I don't know what the verb is here, moved into, I'm trying to be as non-prejudicial as possible, an understanding of the sacred as the supernatural. And of course, the thing that is excluded from extended naturalism is supernatural. Does that mean that the sacred is excluded? I want to talk about what that means. So that's the challenge there. And then the third one is back to what is meant by strong transcendence. And we have a formal definition and we've worked it out. Now we want to, and we're both trained in psychology, we want to move into, you might call the psychology of this, although the argument is that transcendence is not just psychological.
It's not just to make yourself feel better.
Yes.
Put it in simple terms.
So the main idea was that strong transcendence has epistemological and ontological import. It requires the idea is that there are truths about reality that are disclosed only when one goes through transcendence, which also gives you access to different levels, kinds of knowing, things like that.
Absolutely.
And along those, we hope to talk about 3 phenomena. These are not meant to be exhaustive, but just exemplary. But 3 kinds of phenomena which people traditionally express a sense of transcendence. One is in ritual. Rituals often give people a sense of transcendence. They decenter us. We'll talk a little bit about that and how does that fit within this framework. Of course, there's altered states of consciousness, most importantly, mystical experiences, higher states of consciousness. These are often the basis of claims for experiences of transcendence. Do they fit within extended naturalism without merely explaining them away as illusions or epiphenomena, but the way that really stays within the province of strong transcendence? And then last is people express a experience of transcendence of belonging to, a worldview, a more encompassing order. So, this
being
is expressed, being homed, and people will make sacrifices for that identity that transcends their own identity. Of course, a prototypical example is, people will sacrifice their life in war for the sake of their country, for the sake of their home, which seems a very odd thing to do. So those, and again, I'm going to repeat, I'm not claiming that those are exhaustive. That's not the point. I'm not trying to give an exhaustive list. I'm trying to pick out 3 that are exemplary is to see if we can glean anything from our discussion on them. So,
all right,
we're ready to go. So let's start with the first one, the extended naturalism. And so I'm not going to review all the arguments, both the the structural argument and the content arguments, because we've already agreed the consilience between them is very powerful, and they need each other and they support each other in a very powerful way. So I'm going to take it that we have what I'll call something that is convergent. It can't be identical to, because we are post-nominalists, we're post-scientific revolution. We can't just go back to Neoplatonism. So it's something like a current analog to late Neoplatonism, in which there's emergence all the way up and emanation all the way down, right? And you get in somebody like Erigena, you get the claim that there's a one at the bottom, and there's a one at the top. But because the polarity is more important than the poles, there's a oneness between the one from emanation and the one from emergence, and that's all the way. And then those are sort of his. I feel him niggling at me, because I wrote this big book and you're trying to compress it all into a few sentences. So, but I think it's fair to say that he calls that the oneness between the one of emergence and the one of emanation. He calls that God, because he argues that it has many of the properties of God, especially as found within classical monotheism. And I'll distinguish classical monotheism from current monotheism in a second. In that God is, in some sense, he's trying to get a model of creation that is not the making of an artifact, but rather creation is this way of understanding an emanation that calls from emergence and an emergence that responds. And so God is actually creating out of himself, but also within himself. So everything, God is included in everything, but not enclosed. God is beyond everything, but not excluded, kind of model. And go ahead, Greg. Please intervene.
Of course. I'm trying to. I'm not familiar. So, how similar is this to like Spinoza's God? I mean,
so it's similar in this way. Spinoza makes a distinction between nature nurturing and nature being nurtured. And the nature nurturing, of course, is the top down, and the nature being nurtured is bottom up. And he claims that, of course, they are ultimately one. And he claims that, and this is what I was going to get to, like the Neoplatonic one up here, God is it's substance, but it's not substance in the sense of stuff. It's God. God is the ultimate reality. Oh, sorry. Did my mic come back?
Your mic it just changed a little bit of its tone, but it's
okay. Now it's
now
back.
you're there. It is.
Yeah. I hit the mic in it. If I tap the mic, the computer takes that as a signal to switch which mic to use. It's a very odd glitch. So God is in infinite, and like by substance, he means something that exists on its own. He doesn't mean stuff or even an Aristotelian subject. He means something that can be understood and exist on its own, right? So an ultimately real thing, non-thing, because God is infinite with infinite attributes, right? Each attribute is infinite. So God is infinite source of intelligibility. And in that way, he's very similar. And then the bottom up, this is in Spinoza in a really interesting way. And I'm not claiming these two are equally balanced in him. It's one of the things that's right. But Spinoza has this notion of everything has a kinetis. Everything is organizing and trying to preserve itself and determining itself. And so this is very much an emergence, right? But that is also from God, right? The modes and the kinetis. The thing that might not square with emergence and emanation is he seems to be a very hard line, complete determinist. But then he bends it because he seemed to move towards compatibilism. And now we're getting into the intricacies of Spinoza, and perhaps we could put that aside.
Yeah.
I think it's similar enough.
Yeah.
Especially with our limitation on any Neoplatonic framework of not reading the polarity as justifying a two worlds mythology. Spinoza is very, very strong on that, which is what we're both committing to in this argument.
Totally.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's certainly, there's a fairly high level of abstraction here, but I will say this there's a line that I am tracking that's very resonant with the basic structure of UTOK. And what I mean by that is there's the bang knower God relation that I kind of collapsed into wisdom energy. You know, the energy and really energy information source and the organizing intelligibility of that source is the bottom up, top down polarity in UTOK. And so that I sort of like that manifested. And I say that as somebody who's not well versed in this background, but then see that very, very parallel on my own journey, like very strongly represented. That's what catches me. And it's like, oh, okay, I think I can track that with a fairly high degree of resonance.
Yeah, good. I think that's right. And of course, we do have these two frames. I'm not claiming this is an exact match, but we do have the two frames in physics. We have the bottom up from a kind of primordial oneness that isn't the number one. And yet we also seem to have this tremendous set of top-down constraints that are somehow also one. And so what do you mean the oneness at the quantum? We got this weird entanglement and like it's right. And it somehow resonates with the singularity from which the universe emerged, but there's the differentiation principle is also somehow in there. And so I think the Neoplatonic framework actually, well, the Neoplatonic framework, I think actually can sit very well with this.
Right. I mean, you delineated and level up the dialectic between what is reductive physical amounts about the unbelievable generalizability of the world. And when you do that at the substance level, I think you can sort of go down and back into time, and you get this sort of energy, information, implicate order, or whatever, right? And that's the thing in which everything shares. We see it at quarks. If we just do matter and don't worry about sort of the energy matter, you say, okay, quarks and electrons, the fermions build matter, okay? And then that's just unbelievably generalizable. But as you pay, generalizability in and of itself is not really intelligibility.
That's right.
Generalizability in relationship to the capacity for differentiation, held in appropriate dialectic. And so, this is what represented on the coin is there's a generalizable differentiation polarity where the poles between the two is going to afford intelligibility. And it's the right relationship of that, the right ratio of that, that is fundamentally key.
Right. That was well said. Very eloquent. So let's say that we've made this at least initially plausible. It fits well with the argument. It fits well. It's not sort of antithetical to science. It's at least adjacent to it in really resonant and powerful ways. And so here's where we can drop the first penny. Right? Is that when you look at a lot of people, and there's even some very good literature on this, in the classical tradition of even the Abrahamic religions, God is identified with that the top of the, I mean, our language is failing, but with all of that, with the whole emergence, emanation, oneness that is not the number one, that is the source of intelligibility, but is also the conversion of potentiality into actual, all of this language, in fact, was invented in the Aristotelian Neoplatonic framework. Now, they thought of that, and many people, so Maximus, Dionysius, Erigena, Aquinas. There's been a huge revival. Sebastian Morello has written a very good thin book on this. The world is God's icon, arguing that Aquinas should not be understood as an Aristotelian. He should be understood as a Neoplatonist. The analog in the ancient world to him is not Aristotle, it's Plotinus. So this is a very rich sense of God that's very different to what I want to now call common theism. Common theism is the view of theism that's very prevalent for many people today. Sure. And this is the idea of God as the greatest being, the super thing, the greatest agent. and that we can talk about God in very anthropomorphic terms, and we're talking basically correctly. Now, many of the features of common theism do not have a strong basis in classical theology, and this is something that came out in my very wonderful set of discussions with Bishop Maximus. Right. So I think one of the things that you and I both share, and this, is an atheism in the sense of a non-theism, in that we think that all the debates between common theists and atheists are misplaced because they understand God as a super being, the supreme being, and this, of course, comes with, I want to be very charitable here, with the struggled relationship between this Neoplatonic conception and the God, even if there's one or maybe there's multiple, but Christianity and other Judaism, perhaps. I can't get anybody to agree on this. This is why I keep hesitating. But let's call it the God of the Bible, and we can seriously put into question of whether or not the God of the New Testament and the Old Testament are the same God, because we're not saying the Christians are right and the Jews are, but this broad sense that what we might call the post-Christian notion of God that survives within the post-European world.
The theological scholar Karen Armstrong wrote a book called The Case for God. And this got me, this is how I entered this. It was through her, where she was like, all right, the classic notion is God is that which you move toward as you experience transcendence. So that to me just then that's not making an ontological theistic claim. No. That is identifying a process and being, which we'll obviously come back to, strong transcendence, the capacity of a universe to generate strong transcendence and the capacity to move strong transcendence, like puts God on the map, just as a reference point in a particular way.
I like this, this notion, that it's what you're moving towards, but it's also what is affording the movement. And you already did that, and Karen Armstrong would agree with that. This was actually made, I guess, something like an official doctrine within Eastern Christianity, with the notion of epictesis. God is the ground that supports continual self-transcendence, that you don't go to a resting place of stillness and sort of one ending vacation party or something like that. It's in fact that God is the ground field, if you could mix both of those metaphors, in which and through which human beings continually self-transcend.
Wow. I just had an image of model of hierarchical complexity, actually, just there. And was just imagining the emanation emergent design space of recursive potentiality. And then that generative awakening capacity, in the universe as it seeks its variation, selection, attention to create increasingly big loops of epistemic ontic relation, thinking, being, relation. Right.
I think that's great.
Yes, that's certainly what I am. The radius of that, actually, Michael Levin now talks about cognitive light cones. The radius of that epistemic in terms of its potentiality. When I look up to the elephant sun god, that radius then is an imagined eternal radius of possibility and relation. That to pull an epistemic form on the ontic that would afford that thinking, being, relation to be, as realizable as possible.
Right. Okay. All right. So it sounds to me like you're a realist about this, that when we're talking about these things, they have a real referent. They're ontologically based. They're not just psychological constructs. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes. I actually we haven't talked too much about this, but I would technically define myself as a realist, idealist. This is weird. Okay? But essentially what the tree of knowledge would suggest is that we can create a somewhat transcendent realist position through physics, And what I mean by that is there are propositional networks that we can afford a pretty damn good mapping of our physicalist ontology to the ontic, at least to the extent that we can get anything that we can say is real. And my proposition for that is if other propositional aliens were around, they'd look at the matter dimension and have an atomic theory of matter. That's sort of the way I describe that. And that would be my justification for a particular kind of genuinely anchored realism that then creates structural functional relations that then create constraints in relation. Then you get a biopsychosocial history of epistemic ideas, which then manifest in like folk psychological social construction. Hey, John, let's do transcendent naturalism. And there's a particular historical biopsychosocial constructed epistemic that allows us to grip and embody our phenomenological realism. That's also embedded in a physical realism that we need to make coherent. And then there's a capacity for full-fledged abstraction of ideals, mathematical forms that would topologically specify certain kinds of relations and topologically specify certain kinds of ideal relations. The latter essentially being the transcendent God capacity and the former being mathematics on its basic extraction of logical possibility. And what the tree of knowledge basically identifies is, oh, here's your ideal, here's your idea, and here's your real. And it affords an actual coherent relation, I would argue, between a real idea idealism that is actually aligned, and you don't have to then really choose. So it's not idealism or realism. It's idealism in relationship to realism in relationship to ideas that can then be specified coherently.
Okay, that was good.
I'm working on that paper and argument as we speak, John. So we just bumped into sort of like the UTOK ultimate metaphysical framing on real idealism.
Yeah, I'm trying to put it in relationship to other things that I'm familiar with. I mean, one of course is the Platonic framework, in which Plato is a realist about ideal entities, and then of course we have thoughts about that.
I mean, to me, if you put it this way, your being, which is going to be a reference closest to the real, and then you have ideas and ideals. Okay, and it's finding the right relation, and I think I think UTOK can map the specified relationship between those. So at the very least, if you combine idea and ideals in a particular way, you get thinking being conformity. So, and I'm differentiating ideas from ideals from an angle that I'm afforded in relationship to what UTOK gives me.
So let me try. I'm trying to then to map. I'm in a weird position here, so I'm feeling a little bit epistemically queasy about it. But I'm trying to take on the role of people who will potentially interact with this. I'm trying to map what is usually talked about both in the common and the classical theism, where the classical is this one-ing polarity. And it seems to me that the Neoplatonists are talking about something that is at the level of being. They're talking about the ground, right, of being, and both the bottom ground and the top ground. So when they're doing that, are they doing something analogous to what science is doing, in that they are pointing to aspects of reality, but that perhaps can only be disclosed from certain states of cognition and consciousness, or something like that?
I would say so. I mean, what I would say in relationship to this is you have, again, there's the substantial no-thingness that's going to take the real actual potential, and I'll just call that energy. So there's that referent, okay? And then we're going to then create the ultimate intelligibility. If that referent is going to explode across a multitude of both differentiation and sameness, then you have an ultimate logical form that's going to create a topology, which many people in mathematics, sort of the ultimate nature of math is sort of a topological relation of logical analytic possibility or relation or whatever. And again, I'm not a mathematical philosopher, but that's a reasonable assertion from set theory to category theory to topology in mathematics. That's then, you can then create, okay, I'm going to circle this entire possibility that creates the topos of the set, and then I'm going to differentiate the logical relations within. And to me, that creates a one-many substance differentiation and a one-many ideal form differentiation. And it is the mapping of the two.
Right. So it's the mapping, right. And so is that conformity relationship, because there's two sides of it. One is epistemically, we are mapping the two together. But is that mapping pointing to a truth that they actually belong together in some ontological sense, independent of our epistemic mapping?
I think this is where you get the leveling up argument.
Yes, that's right.
The grammar of our cognition. And now, if you look at like the tree of knowledge, what I'm basically saying is, well, math and God is up here at the ultimate oneness, right?
Yeah.
Energy's down here. And then you have what in between? You have the emergence of a biological intelligence, a minded animal intelligence, and a justifying human intelligence that we then are getting in right relation, both top up, bottom up, top down, and the cognitive grammar that is afforded to us as a function of the evolutionary processes themselves that is actually tracking. And so I think you do an evolutionary epistemology, like, well, yeah, the structure of the grammar is mapping the structure of events, or at some level of modeling. There's a gripping conformity. And this, when we get into phenomenology, the most real, the most meaningful is the tightness of the grip.
Yes.
So that's when we feel the phenomenologically most real.
Okay. So I think this is really good. I hope I'm not upsetting you, because this I'm really.
Oh, you're not upsetting me. I'm just scared. I'm just saying. I'll just tell everybody this is the right at the edge of my thinking. I'm brainstorming this. No. I haven't really worked it all out. So.
Yeah, and that's what I meant. I didn't mean you were epistemically a coward. I didn't mean that at all. I meant I'm drawing you to the very limit.
Right. I'm at the limit of sorting this out. That's what I'm. By the way, I'm reading Religion and Nothingness, thanks to you. Damn, that is, I'm halfway through that. And that's actually, I'm finding that to be like, oh, okay, I can.
Yep. And Zen Neoplatonism is going to be the next series is on. And Nishitani is going to figure largely in that. Okay, so I want to propose to you that that gripping, that's what classical theism meant. That's what it was pointing to. And it got lost into, the two worlds mythology separated those two and then reified them in an oppositional manner. And we get a lot of the problems of common theism today.
Agreed. I agree. That makes very good sense to me.
Okay. So that means the next thing is there was a sense of sacredness. So we're moving to the second point that came out of this, which was, this.
Actually, let's just summarize, because we bounced around. Can I just summarize what we mean by this is going to, all right, let's ground us a little bit. What we're doing here, folks, if you didn't catch it, is like we're grounding our extended naturalism. Okay. And we're basically saying, hey, as we talked about last time, I'll just summarize. We need a picture of reality that includes the knower about reality. We need both physics and a theory of the physicists as to how they would manifest. And any theory of intelligibility includes the natural science as an intelligible entity that has to actually have some sort of ontological status in the world.
Yes.
Okay. And then fundamentally, then our metaphysical ontological epistemology has got to be a holism between the known and the knower. And our knowledge intelligibility is inherent around the conformity of those two frames.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's the extended naturalism. That's quite different than a physical reductionism, where you can assume that the knower can just be an abstract representationalism of underlying deterministic cause. And if we get to the root of the bottom of that, you can go all the way up. That's what we're rejecting. And so we're giving, and what this means fundamentally is then the relationship of thinking being, okay, is essentially there's a conformity that we have to, that this points to. So that's the ground. Now that's going to set the stage for issues of sacredness and strong transcendence.
Excellent. And Gregg inadvertently, maybe, or perhaps intentionally, was alluding to an amazing book by Eric Pearl, Thinking Being.
I was.
And it covers this argument. And Pearl, in fact, makes the argument that there is, that this was basically the tradition that gets taken up even into Aquinas. And you could have also made it similarly for Dionysius and Maximus.
Right, and you pointed me to that book, and I enjoyed it.
Yes,
and I was referring to it subtly, but thank you for making that explicit. Yes.
And so, and Pearl has basically argued for something sort of like around non-theism, because I think I have to be careful about this, but I think I'm surmising that he's worried about that how theism has come to mean what is now called common theism, and that's problematic, I think, for him in certain ways. Given that, and Pearl even says this in the book, he says, there's something about when you come to a realization of what we've just talked about, there's an experience, he says, there's a religious experience or a sacred experience of sacredness, at least. And of course, the terms religion and spirituality are massively contentious, and academics have no consensus on it. I want to talk about, I'm going to use the word spirituality when I'm talking about sort of more individually and religion more collectively, not because that's definitive, because it's helpful, so we can just talk. And I'm going to really think about these in terms of some kind of apprehension of the sacred that puts some kind of normative call on people. So very, very broadly. The sacred, and that puts a call on me. And so the notion of the sacred then that I think can satisfy that definition, be within extended naturalism, is an apprehension of, right, and not just a conceptual apprehension. We're talking about a full perspectival, participatory, right, apprehension of what we've been talking about when we've been talking about this one, for lack of a better term, and that you get a sense of sacredness as an inexhaustible, infinite, and therefore at times paradoxical, right, fount of intelligibility. And if you think, well, paradox, you're not allowed to invoke that, you better take a look at physics and what's happening in physics, because it's rampant. Paradox, complementarity is it's basically telling you accept the paradox. It's both a particle and a wave, but it can't be yes, but it is, right? And et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't mean you're allowed to be indiscriminately paradoxical, but it's like when you push, right? So this experience of the inexhaustible is, I get it, but I don't get it. That's the sort of core paradox, right? It's gripping me. I'm getting a sense of more real, but it's also giving me a sense that I could never actually fully comprehend it. So there's a moreness and a withdrawal. There's a shining in and a withdrawal simultaneously that seems to be at the core.
Is this what you talked about in After Socrates of sort of the learned ignorance? Is this that space?
Yes.
Okay.
Part of the proposal of, well, and that's why I end with Erigena and Cusa, is the way we can properly stance ourselves. I'm turning stance into a verb. The way we can properly stance ourselves to have that apprehension of the sacred is learned ignorance, precisely because it's the state that most allows us to apprehend the one, again, which is an inadequate term, in this way, this inexhaustible, but nevertheless not comprehensible, in the sense of I can't get my cognition to grip it, right? And that, and Nicholas of Cusa, the vision of God, or any of these people. And again, you don't have to. I don't mean to offend anybody. Take a look at other traditions. First of all, other Abrahamic traditions, Sufism, the mystical branches of Judaism. You can also see important analogs, not identities, important analogs in Vedanta, in Taoism, in Buddhism, in Zen, etc. Nishitani's religion and nothingness is, it gets very much, and when you're at the very limits of intelligibility, you start to get into these paradoxes of, the essence of fire is not fire because fire can't burn itself, and all these weird things. And the point of those is not to do pseudoscience. The point of those is to show the incapacity of propositional knowing to get this into a complete and consistent formal system, because as we know, there's no such damn thing as a complete and consistent formal system, right? Okay, so the proposal is there can be, and this is why I wanted to push on you, my friend, because I think there's an experience of sacredness, but I think it's not just projective. I think if we're talking about real conformity, there is something in being that is also conforming in the experience of sacred, so that there it is meaningful. It is not a Kantian thing in itself beyond. It is meaningful to talk about the sacred as the being side of the experience of sacredness. That's the point I wanted to make. Does that land as reasonable or plausible for you?
Yes, but we got to unpack it.
Well, I'm happy to stop and unpack if you wish.
Yeah. I mean, so.
But first of all, but you think the argument is at least prima facie an argument worthy of investigation?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm reminded of a conversation Zach Stein had with Ian McGilchrist on the concept of value in the universe.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resonance there. I mean, if you're wondering, well, wait a minute, how can something be sacred? Well, as I said to some people who were asking me about that conversation, like, well, at an analytic, scientific, I describe the core of the nervous system as an investment value system. Okay. Yeah. And that valuing is both epistemic, but there's an ontic grounding and an ontic epistemic relation.
Yes.
Right. And there'll be then ontic epistemic patterning around valuing in a particular kind of way. And the core of it, what's aesthetics, okay, is going to relate to that. So for me, then this is like, okay, there is a particular kind of relation. There is a particular kind of relation. And that relation, especially if we're going to use it like a transjective kind of epistemological framing, that relation can be specified through that kind of epistemological.
I think, let me try this on you then, because that what you just said, I think. So, and we've talked a bit about this before, and we actually talked about it in conjunction with Zach. And this isn't exactly what he says, but you can see the influence. I think there's an ineffable groundedness to our experience that we are pointing to when we use the word soul.
Yep.
And I think there's an ineffable there's an ineffable, what do I want to call it? There's an ineffable aspect to our self-transcendence that we point to with spirit. That word spirit is pointing to, right?
Hold on 1 second. So I told you I'm on the edge of this. Okay. So idea is going to actually connect to mind to ensoulment.
Yes.
Okay. The embodied, perspectival, subjective experience of being. Yeah. The cognitive, behavioral, and action procedure is going to be actually then a transjective real. Like, what the fuck can I lift this goddamn thing up? And then the ideal, the symbolic ideal, is going to connect to the transcendent. If we go to Zach's, so his 3 lines of, developmental skill, ensoulment, and idea, transcendence, is actually going to be pretty damn close. Again, I told you I'm right on the edge of this tripartite.
No. And look, I'm not trying to nail you down. Right?
No, I know. I just, you know me, we're all of us as academics are like, okay, I do want to work this out.
No. In fact, I think it's inappropriate to try and say we've nailed this down. We're really exploring this because the only thing I'm trying to do is to show these, and I think I'm using this word correctly, the spiritual richness of the framework that we're working on, right? That it's got a lot here. It's got a lot it can give. I think now what I was going to say was you've got ensoulment, and then you've got the self, right? And that's sort of mediating between ensoulment and self-transcendence. And what it's doing is it's trying to get them organized so that they nexus with agency in the world. So these are not just these are things that actually empower your agency in the world, and it sounds like you're agreeing with that. And then what I wanted to say is all of that's the soul, spirit, self side of sacredness, and then there's something, each one of those picks out aspects of the world, or Spinoza's God or nature, that it conforms to, and that's the sacred, right? So sacredness is the transjective relation.
Here's where I'm going now. I'm going to, if you go back to read E.O. Wilson's original Concilians, okay, it's total naturalist, right?
Yeah.
And stuck. But what is he groping for? He's feeling it. He's wishing for it. He is seeing consilience in nature. And what is he actually saying? There is a way in which we can unify our epistemological ontological structure in there, and the beauty and the potentiality and the agency and what that would mean for things.
Yes.
Okay? Moves him in a religio way.
Yeah, very much.
It finds him, it gets him, this is, oh my God, what else could matter more, Jack?
Yes, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Well, what else would have more meaning? And there you go. That guy's completely, obviously, atheistic naturalist, but you can see his soul spirit longing.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Okay, well, that's what I think I've made a good enough case then that we can really deeply bring in soul language, self language, and spirit language, and we can do it in a deeply transjective way. And we can say we can point to these, right? This side of the remember, the polarity is what matters, not the pole. But there's this side of the pole is the spirit, self, soul side, and there is corresponding, right, things that are entering into the co-determination, the conformity, just like relevance is transjective and meaning is sacredness is a transjective experience. And there's the spirit, self, soul side, and then there's the emanation, emergence, polarity side, and those two are plugging together. When they plug together in this way, you get sacredness.
That's in UTOK language, marrying the coin to the tree at the level of, that's the marriage of that. And then find yourself, that's finding right relationship to then orient toward not that those things are all then woven together in the valuing relevance row structure, but they are then, and that's what the idea is. Oh my God, you marry a ritual of unbelievable sacredness, right?
Yeah.
In a particular context that affords potentialities across various increasing levels of epistemic ontic realization.
Now, if we could take it that there is a possibility that our argument is significantly correct, that there's a real distinction between classical theism, which I will now call non-theism, to broaden it beyond the Abrahamic religions.
Right. I think, to me, so I got socialized in theism meant belief in a personal knowable God, which is a pretty reasonable definition. So
but what I'm saying is that you and I were both educated that was the only
way to think about it. Totally. The classic version is different than the common recent version.
Right. And so to not fall into endless confusion, and also to open up the resonances between the classical Abrahamic tradition and the non-Abrahamic traditions, I'm going to talk about a non-theism. But the point I wanted to make is that means there is a chance for at least very deep and, moving towards each other, but also moving beyond where you were, between what we're proposing and the traditional religions.
Yes, totally.
Yes.
Totally. Once if God is moving towards transcendence, if that's a way to summarize, in a sort of a nutshell, and we are basically arguing there's an extended naturalism that's available to us to differentiate the sacred so we can be oriented toward a strong transcendence.
Yes.
I mean, the parallels there are quite profound.
Yes. And I won't get into another argument I've been making popular, which is that we need to get a lot clearer about how we can tap into the spiritual, sapiential, somatic aspects of our spirituality in order to deal with and do it in a much more globally integrative manner if we're going to deal with the looming challenges that are with the advent of AGI.
The kairos of the moment is upon us.
Yes.
So we better let's get ourselves aligned in right relation, because shit's happening.
Yes. So Greg, I'm going to propose something here, because we've used up almost all of our time. We've only got about 10 minutes or so, maybe 15. I think we should have a fourth in which we talk about strong transcendence, because I want to go in depth about ritual, altered states of consciousness.
Right.
and belongingness to a worldview, and just lay that out a little bit more. I'd like to take maybe 5 minutes to foreshadow what I'd like to do with that, get your responses, and then maybe we'll wrap this up. So there'll be a fourth of just you and I, and then we'll start with everybody else.
That sounds good. I'll drop another concept before you do that, that I'm playing with. Okay.
Okay, please.
And this may relate to the sacred and in this context. Okay. I stumbled on a interesting polarity, what I call inconsequential versus consequential history.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Where inconsequential history, basically, what's the radius? You talked about epiphenomenal, and it's not really a phenomenal, but there are definitely different radius of causal impact. So if it exists, it will have a causal impact, but different things will have the amount of causal impact across time. So the feedback loop where we get a cell that can replicate and explode into the possibility space of life has causal impact that is, that's got consequential history. Okay. So then the issue is like, okay, what are the moments and why that give rise to consequential history? Okay. These consequential history moments then are going to, because of by definition, the impact they carry, when we get pulled towards certain kinds of sacredness, there's going to be something in relationship to consequential versus inconsequential. It's going to pull our attention. Okay. Both in terms of awe and horror, by the way.
Yes.
So consequential can be disastrous. All right.
Yeah.
But what are the consequential histories that move towards a conforming awakening of the ontic epistemic that affords that growth in awareness, agency, et cetera, et cetera? There'll be the certain kind. And so that's what I will throw in there, basically like, are the things that are sacred the things that afford this kind of emanation, emergent process, are the consequential events?
I think that's very good. That's really good. That's juicy good. There's a potential convergence. So maybe we could talk a little bit about it next time, but I forget the theorist. I'll make sure I get the name. Jim Rutt had just passed the name on to me. Well, he is talking about meaning in terms of consequential decisions of consequence. Now, of course, there's the philosopher in me immediately leaps out and says, well, there's a problem with that. Is it purely quantitative? Because everything has sort of infinite rippling effects throughout the universe. And if you say, no, a consequential decision is one that has consequential effects, and consequential means important or relevant, then you haven't really said much other than meaning is about relevance, which maybe what I did like about the proposal, and then I'll come back to say what I think can be, how can my criticism can be responded to, is it brings in decision into meaning that has largely been not there in things like purpose and coherence and mattering, right? But the existentialists, Kierkegaard, of course, pivotal among them, and you may know our friend Christopher Mastropietro and I have been having some very powerful discussions about this. Kierkegaard has emphasized the importance of the act of decision for meaningfulness. And so I think there's something right about this, bringing in this decisive dimension. And I was trying to get at how could we get a non-circular account of consequential decisions that could feed back into an understanding of maybe a missing dimension in meaningfulness. And so this is right off the top of my head too. And so I'm not saying we can resolve this now, but maybe there's something about consequential there. I mean, I think it has also to do with your juncture points. I think some consequential decisions are consequential because they actually impact causally. They're causally relevant to our survival, right? And that's why they're meaningful, because those decisions. Then, of course, there's ones that are consequential to our development of mindedness. And then there are ones that are consequential to our ongoing development of our personhood.
Absolutely.
So there's one way we can talk about consequentiality is how far up the stack does it move you? And this has something probably also with Maslow, who did not create the bloody pyramid, by the way, as we found out many times. But there's something there, and that's Plotinus too, going up, right? The various souls. But I'm also thinking, is there? So I got a vertical from your work, but I'm also hearing a potentially horizontal. Is that right? Or were you?
Yeah, the horizontal basically is scope. Okay, so the vertical is the stack, and then this horizontal is what's the space-time aggregate dimension, essentially. So then there's okay, this is consequential for me. Okay, so you get a cancer cell in you, and then how much does that spread across? And then it is spread in you, and then if you die, well, all right, but if that cancer cell came from Hiroshima, and Hiroshima, well, then the consequence of that across aggregate. So I would say, to me, immediately, if I were to say, okay, well, what's the horizontal? Well, the horizontal is what is the scope, the aggregate scope of the impact across?
Okay, so there's
living minded.
Okay. Good. So it's both, right? So one way we could understand meaningfulness is to be connected to reality, in mattering and in intelligibility. So we're not abandoning any of the previous development, but in a way that affords you to make consequential decisions where the consequence is measured both by the vertical stack and the horizontal scope. Now, so far so good. Does that sound?
That sounds reasonable to me. Absolutely.
Right. And if what I'm saying is, if we can get it into meaning of lifeness, then moving it into religio and sacredness is not far away. Right.
Nope.
Right. So the one thing about the scope is, we don't have to solve this, but so everything has actually an indeterminately large number of causal effects, right? Right. And so what you want to say, though, is something like you want to make a distinction between causation and causal relevance. Because what you want to say is, those attenuating effects that are happening at the edge, they don't generate, they're not going to figure in any important explanation of things. So see what I'm saying? It's more, I think, totally. just to avoid an easy refutation.
Right.
It is about causal relevance.
Yes, definitely.
Causal relevance is, does that cause serve in an important explanation?
Absolutely. And then I was, again, this is at the edge of my thinking, but anyway, there's a specific entity that I am considering that I can get into in more detail, but that it is at one level completely inconsequential, and yet it seems to carry an enormous potential for consequence. Okay. So another way of thinking about it, imagine a particular intersection of unbelievable possibilities that if people became aware of at the time, that would then explode. But prior to awareness, it simply sits as a inconsequential potential. Right. So there's another angle on, and then I'm trying to work out the little eidos of a structure functional aspectualized relationship of the ability to see this potential to become actual, and then the interrelationship of then acting upon that to make that happen in the future. So then you are bringing a particular intersection, talk about the sacred. Okay, you find this thing, and then how do you relate to it, and how do you relate to others in relationship to it, in relationship to the transformation of an inconsequential into consequential. Okay, right. So that's another layering of this entity, which brings in specific epistemic perspectival relations. But then it becomes transjective. And now all of a sudden you go from, oh, this isn't going to be anything, to this unbelievable moment in history that then springs forth its network to all other historical features. And as it does that, it then blows from an inconsequential to a consequential entity.
So how about this as a proposal for what you just proposed? A meta proposal, a proposal about your proposal. It sounds to me that what you've done is figured out a way of articulating, not exhaustively, but again, an important exemplary of how a transformation can actually disclose reality.
That's what I'm trying. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. And that's a strong transcendent. There's a strong transcendent element to that.
Right. And then the second part of my proposal is the way you described that, that could be the case both for individuals, but especially at the level of collective distributed, the collective intelligence of distributed cognition.
Precisely.
That's good. Let's remember all of this and let's bring it into then the discussion. So what I want, is it okay if I move towards the foreshadowing of what we want to do?
Please. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I derailed this a little. Well, not derailed, but yeah, let's go. Absolutely.
So what I want to make is I want to break, and there's been a series of arguments, and they're all online, and I'll point to them. So I'll try and get the gist of the deep interconnections between an extended notion of rationality and ritual, and what they are, what that means, and how that can not explain them away, but explain their power, their real power, and in a way that's conforming with this notion of sacredness, and extended naturalism, so that we can explain how and why within extended naturalism we get strong transcendence within ritual experiences. And then I want to do a similar argument, building on already existing arguments about altered states of consciousness. Again, not explaining them away, but also not relying on supernaturalism or any kind of multiple worldism where, oh, I go and talk to the space aliens or in ultimate dimensions or things like this. And so I want to lay that out dialogically with you. And then one that I haven't done much work on, I'm just doing preliminary. And so we can both sort of water heaven with our tears as we throw our projectiles. But this notion again of transcendence in a sense of belonging to something, belonging to a greater, more encompassing worldview, but not just worldview, world community, etc., and really unpack as much as we can, at least initially. And I think then we will have three ways in which we've concretized the structure. So we've got the structure laid out by my argument, the content laid out by your argument, and then the two of us together are working out, yes, but what are the particular avenues of phenomenological experience of transcendence that can be explained with the structure and the content? And that will give us, I think, what we need. And then we'll have sort of this core four that we can refer to, and then we can ask our interlocutors to work within that framework. They're, of course, free to challenge it, but they have to at least work within it in their discussions with us.
Perfect. That sounds brilliant.
Okay. Well, great work today, as always. Thank you very much, my good friend.
Thank you. No, it was always super enjoyable, friend.
And it's really wonderful to see you at the edge of your thinking. You get very on fire and alive, and it's.
I'm groping for the real, John.
Well, as we all should. A man's reach should exceed his grasp. Or what is the heaven for? Take good care, my friend.
Take care.